Wait for it. Wait for it. It's the after show. It's the show after the show.
You said go.
Go? We're on? Oh, great, we're on. Great to see everybody. So anyway, we're talking about, obviously today about what happened this Sunday, which was a football Sunday. Those of you who didn't see the show, Tyrone Poole, former NFL player, motivational speaker. Simone Cherie Price, political fundraiser. Jamie Bendel, who is a comedian and an attorney. Don't hold that against them. I'm an attorney too. I'm an attorney too, Jamie. Of course, Letitia Lance. Yeah, we're on the same team. So here's the first question, though, for Tyrone. And this is something I didn't ask you on the air, but I probably should have, but I'll ask you now. Like, if you were still in uniform during the national anthem, show me what you'd be doing.
Do I have time to answer that question?
I think he was asking just for a straight up demonstration.
I'm asking for a demonstration. If the national anthem was going on right now, what would you be doing? Show me.
Do you want me to start singing?
Yeah.
I've answered that question 1,000 times. I would stand.
You'll stand.
Yes,
Why?
There's 1,000 ways to skin a cat, and there's a proper way to do it the right way to get the lasting effects. Okay, that's what I'm about. What can we do that is going to have the most lasting impression? So kneeling, yes, that's you can do that. That's your choice. But I choose to stand. So everybody has a choice. Like you chose to wear that shirt with that suit, that's your choice.
My wife chose it.
Is that a demonstration?
But we all have choices.
Demonstration or
I
something?
choose to stand.
You would stand?
Well,
Yes.
okay, so Ty, but is some of that driven by your background as a motivational speaker? So if you're
No,
going,
it's not.
well, that's what I was asking. I didn't know if there was
It's
a.
just what you. Okay, I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna say the only way if you want to change this world, really, you gotta change people's hearts.
Mhm.
Kneeling, standing, that ain't gonna do nothing. If you change your heart, you change the person's heart, then you change the way they think, then you change their actions, and you see the world.
That's interesting because this whole discussion, there's no one changing their mind anywhere on social media. I mean,
but we're talking about
well, if
the
anything.
shootings, the shooting, the degrading of human life. Until you get the correction in your heart that that's another human being, you're not changing.
How do you change someone's heart then?
Of course, you got to educate.
No, I think historically we've always seen that laws tend to prelude cultural change. So typically we write down what the moral truth is. We decide that no, slavery actually is not a great idea, and then hearts and minds tend to follow. And now all of a sudden, in general, we tend to believe that that's
Well, but okay,
I
so
think,
if
but
the,
once before you even get to the laws, though, and we've seen over time in our American history that there have been protests before we get to that point. You look at Martin Luther King, you look at the Montgomery bus boycott. So this is a disruption, and they're getting people's attention. But is it the best way for them to be doing
well,
it?
but so if I understand correctly, if the initial conflict stems from the fact that a otherwise routine interaction between a citizen and a police officer shouldn't end in a fatality, right? And if it does, then what was the breakdown that occurred to have that result? And if it's an anomaly and it's a one-off, you go, okay, it was just one of those weird things that happened. But if it happens again, and there's a similar outcome, and it happens again, and there's a similar outcome, then at some point somebody says, maybe there's a different way to address this, and how do we do that? Because what seemed completely an outlier now maybe is seeming far more
963
common.
times this year.
Is seeming far more common.
let me tell you what Greg is saying. Greg is saying kneeling, and this is interesting, kneeling is making people angry, which is causing even more hate.
I think that you really kind of twist the knife backwards when you allow that to be your response. Like Donald Trump, I think, has been kind of in my mind where this has all gone wrong. I think that there may have been a very general mutual understanding between people who do and don't want to pledge. But when we have opposite sides of the steering wheel and the president picks a side, he's now steering the car to the point that it's going to swerve, that we can't end safely. We're going to end up crashing. I think that all he did was kind of add fuel to something that could have potentially died down. In general, you're going to be on one side or the other, but I don't think it's about right or wrong, whether it's right or wrong to protest.
Well,
it's about what's effective.
Okay, so within, and again, let's assume that we're all teammates, right? And there would be maybe some of us would choose to kneel, maybe some of us would choose to stand, but if our and that team component says my teammates are being attacked because of the decisions that they're making, that would presumably cause us to bind together more tightly, right? And maybe the president's point, although he's not making it in that way, is to say as Americans, we're all supposed to be on the same team, right? And instead of having an opportunity for us to revisit those things that should be drawing us together, they're being approached in a way that, as Vinnie makes mention of, is pushing us a little bit further apart.
P's though. I mean, I really can't
Well,
be further apart from you. Than
Yeah,
you call
no,
me
I
a
understand
P.
that, but that's why. That's why.
Here's
I
what Bill
couple
is saying. We wouldn't be having this conversation if the protests were armbands or something other than disrespecting the symbol of freedom. Which again goes back to, all right, you're making a point, but the way you're making the point is causing this reaction. Is causing this reaction on the people. And our poll, our Facebook poll, was, what was it, 67. 63 or 67% said they would fire all these players if they were the owner of the team, right? So, is there any aspect of this that might be counterproductive in the way that the protest is taking
Simone
place?
hit on that. She said it's what's effective. So you don't find this to be an effective way to do it.
I don't think it's, no, Graham versus Connors is the problem here. So I don't think it's going to be effective. But what I will say is what people don't, they have to swallow American patriotism in all of its forms, right? So there are plenty of countries you can go to in which you have to pledge to the flag. You have to love the flag, you have to wrap yourself in it, you have to hang it outside your house. The thing about this country is that you don't have to do that here. So, I mean, as much as I am a conservative, as much as I believe in individual freedom, and I believe that flag's important, and I believe in pledging to the flag, I also kind of believe that this is the one place that that's really not forced. So if you do want to go somewhere where everyone around you has to pledge to the flag, you have those options. We're supposed to be happy to be Americans because we don't have to do that.
And again, I'm reading all your comments, and thanks so much for taking part in all this. And again, the common theme throughout is that the flag, the national anthem, represent the men and women who have served our country and who have given their lives to our country. So when you disrespect the anthem and the flag at that moment, and we're talking about before a sporting event, right? And that's the moment where these two things are put together, that for the people who are angry with the protesters, overwhelmingly, this is the reason. And on the other side, the people who are protesting aren't even,
It's not their intention.
it's not their intention. So you have an unintentional impact on the point, on this whole thing. So is there any way that you see the two sides of this debate finding common ground and getting together?
I do. And I hate to say it, but it's what our country has done historically. It's when we become in conflict with another country. When our country was attacked on 9/11, we immediately generally rallied around together. In other times of war against other countries, we tend to kind of default and fall back to being together. What I would challenge those who say it's disrespectful to the military is to listen to some of those people in the military who today have been saying, I served, so you have the option to kneel, right? So we can't just dismiss those who are in, I defer greatly to those who make the choice to volunteer to serve this country and whose love of this country is expressed in a different way than I might choose to express it, and it's a country that I love terrifically, right? So I would suggest that's in those times of national challenge that we do tend to come
And
together.
then think about it like this. Let's put it in another light. Say if your mother and your father did something to you that made you angry. Do you discount your mother and father? That's not my mother, it's not my father. Still, you show them respect, but you dislike what they did. So I think it's kind of like the same thing. You know, you still show the flag respect, but you don't like what's happening in the country. So, you know, it's just like I said, the guy in Detroit, he kneeled, but he still sang the national anthem.
Mm-hmm.
So you're doing both. You're saying, hey, I understand what this country has given me, but I also understand what this country is not doing correctly. So it's like you throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Well, and interestingly, all of us, particularly, you know, every night you end your show with Hug Your Kids, right?
Right.
And if you're children playing sports, or if you're at a public sporting event, you are at a place where there's an anthem played before youth sporting events, right? And it is something that is a moving experience to listen to that anthem and to think about the sacrifice that people have made, right? So we're all now, in some respects, forced to be a part of this conversation the next time we're at a public event where the anthem is played, right? There is a little bit of where we're all sort of dragged to confront what our ideas are about some of these issues because of our public participation in our children's sporting events, or the next time we're at the Falcons game or the Braves stadium.
And I'm trying to find, can you find the person who, someone said, why don't we just,
Ty just had it.
Yes.
What's
But
the name?
because you brought up kids, there
Please.
is a Pee Wee League
Oh, yeah.
in St. Louis,
Mhm.
7 and 8 year olds.
Nora Teague.
And they didn't consult with their parents. They talked to their coaches about it, but it wasn't the parents' idea. It wasn't the coach's idea. They decided to take a knee after the protests that went on in St. Louis. So what is the message that you're sending the kids? Are you teaching them? You're saying that it needs to come from your heart, but are you teaching them also to stand up what they feel is right?
Do I have time to share like a personal
Yeah.
Sure.
experience? Okay. Again, we talk about education, knowledge. Okay. When you're educated and you're put in a situation, then you 9 times out of 10 you're gonna get the right results. Okay, I'm playing with the Indianapolis Colts. I get pulled over. I'm gonna give you guys the quick 2-minute version. So speaking football, I get pulled over. You know, young African.
Pulled over driving.
I'm putting exactly.
Okay.
What happened? There was a police officer had pulled over another car. So typically the law says, you know, you're supposed to go around, but I'm on kind of like 285. You know, it's a lot of other traffic. So if I merge over, you know, I'm going to cause an accident. So I kind of, you know, went around him. So he radios up the street. Now I understand. I'm driving a Mercedes, and you know, so he radios up the street. Another cop pulls me over, but it's not the cop that I went around after I thought about it. So he gets behind me, comes up, and he was trying to get me to react in a way that would cause and justify, that he could justify and say, hey, he did this, he was resisting. But because I was educated, I said, you know, I know what he's trying to do. I ain't gonna do it. You want to put my hands? I put my hand. You want me to call you sir? I call you sir. Whatever. I gotta understand the situation. But most of us, we go into situations, well, if they do me like this, my first reaction gonna be, but we don't think about the consequences. So when I first was introduced to that situation, I had already been educated. So that education helped keep me out of a situation that someone was trying to get me to react in a way. The guy actually, he was really trying to get me to.
That's not always the case, because there are people who are educated who might react in the same way that you do.
When I say educated, I'm not talking about if you know 2 + 2 is 4.
No, I understand
I'm saying
what
it's
you
like when people like, when I do my speaking, I have a sermon, not sermon, but I have a seminar that I do that life skills. It's kind of like emotional life skills, because sometimes people don't know how to control their emotion. Yeah, you can educated, you know how to put in a plug in a wall, but sometimes emotionally we're not educated. So we let the best of our emotion get to us, and we react in a certain way that we're like, okay, educationally, you know, you're not supposed to do that.
Right.
We have to
Well,
remember
there
that
are
racism.
circumstances.
We have to remember that racism doesn't require that, right? So there's no sort of degree that can kind of get you out of believing that people aren't necessarily on the same plane. And so when you have a situation where people are protesting silently, and the reason why I thought that's the best way you could go about it is because we've had flag burning incidents by the bucket load over the last year. People were burning flags, ripping them up, sprinkling them in the streets, and everyone was upset about that. I kind of consider those to be disrespectful towards the flag. I don't consider staying silent or kneeling or even putting up your fist during the national anthem really disrespecting the flag. We've seen so much worse than that. And I think we do have to remember that when you have people that are protesting silently and peacefully, and like you said, there were chants, the Ravens were playing today of saying, oh, if you don't like the flag, N-words go away. People who say that, well, it just makes the hate worse if I don't see people with the skin color really loving the flag. I mean, you're kind of proving the point at the same time. I mean, the racism is there, and that's kind of why they're addressing it. So I really don't think there's a better way to go about it if you are going to protest. This is the most peaceful, silent protest you're going to get.
How long do you think they're going to do it?
I hope not too long, because like I said, I do believe that it's a nice stand, but I don't believe it's the solution. I think we have to focus on the solution, and I think that the real
getting the
problem,
attention that it needs in order to create a solution?
It's not necessary. Lambda Legal, the ACLU, there are so many organizations. In fact, Colin Kaepernick in his first interview after these incidents completely said, I'm working on something. I think reporters asked him point blank, like, what are you planning on doing about this? And he said, I'm working on something. There's so many, there's over 1 million registered nonprofits right now, and a quarter of them almost are in the justice space or legal space. There's so many people who can help you to get laws passed. You can overturn Graham versus Connor. You can make it so that police officers don't get to use their own discretion about justifiable force. There are things that you can do, and they'd be much more effective than the protests.
Hey, Ruth has a really interesting comment, and thanks so much, Ruth. She said, why was the NFL against Tebow kneeling for God, but it's okay to kneel during the anthem?
I'm asking. I don't recall.
They were. There was
Wasn't
a lot of
he kneeling after
a lot
the
of
touchdown?
Yeah.
There was a lot of.
So they have rules about the touchdowns, though, right?
Right. Well, the point being, like, they have rules about that, and I think Ruth's point, and I don't want to speak for you, Ruth, but I think Ruth's point is, is the NFL, should they Are they a little misguided in what they value here? And who you're going after a guy who's kneeling and praying to God, and then but there's no rules for that. There's rules for that, but there's not rules for this.
Well,
I mean, should there be? First of all, you're a former NFL player. Should there be rules on this, or should the rule just be, hey, they can do what they want? How do you think the NFL players or the union would react if all of a sudden this became like something they were bargaining over, and the NFL was like, listen, we don't need all this negative publicity. You guys got to stand.
Yeah. Now, I don't know what that will do or what that will become when the CBA comes up, but I can say this: some politician when the next election comes up, you're going to see this come back up again. But I would say that basically everyone has their right. Okay, you can do what you want, but when you're inside an organization, you work for the organization, I think you have to abide by the rules of that organization. Your freedom, so to speak, gets taken away. So by you guys working here with 11 Alive,
that's right. We have rules.
When they say requirements are, I don't care if they tell you to dress in a suit and tie. If that's a requirement, you have to follow because you signed over your rights to them. So if it's the NFL, you come to the NFL, if they say that this is the rule, these are the rules of the land, then you have to abide by them. Now, what you do on your free time, that's your free time. But when you're working for the NFL, if we say this, then that's what you got to do.
But isn't that what's interesting is we're seeing in some respects with some of the RIFRA stuff, right, is we're seeing in some respects an expansion of religious expression or protection of religious expression in the professional workspace. You work for a company, you say, I don't want to fill a prescription for birth control, and they say, well, we're gonna give some protection for that. Even if CVS says you fill the prescriptions as they show up. So we are finding ourselves in some areas where things that we sort of had assumed were the way things were going to be, we're now seeing some friction points on some of those, and it'll be interesting to see. Listen, my recollection growing up was that the anthem wasn't always shown on television. That wasn't necessarily something that was a part of the game experience in the way it is part of the game experience now. So there is, I guess, a reminder of a sort that some of these things are temporary in nature, that what we assume was always part of the game day experience isn't, and the platforms that people have now are more expansive than they were previously with Twitter and social media and some of the other stuff, so it is a bit of a moving target.
Vinnie, you brought this up earlier. Was it, and correct me if I'm wrong, the anthem wasn't, or players didn't have to come out for the anthem until 2009?
Right, well, you played early. Did you guys have to come out for the anthem?
Like I said, basically when I played, everybody. Well, I retired in 2009, so
right.
It looked like I played.
So when you played way back,
but here's the thing, like,
did you guys come out?
Society has changed so much.
But what was it back then?
Did you have to come out?
Did you have to come out? Were there NFL rules that the team had to be out, or the teams were in?
At the time, I wouldn't have known if the rule if there was a rule like that, because everybody stood and everybody came out. And
they did come out.
Already out. So really, I didn't wouldn't know if that rule applied because everybody was already out there on the field. So, but now with everything happening in this society, people are trying to find ways to make statements, and what is the greatest platform that people are visible, that you can be seen, is when the national anthem is being played, because everybody's paying attention.
Everyone's paying
if they
attention.
see something out of order, the eyes go there. So that's why I say sometimes it's right, wrong. You can have the right intention, but it may be the wrong setting, platform, or what have you. And kind of going back to what Simone was saying, I was going to use the analogy of a movie. When they make movies, they always start at the end and build from there. So to your point, I'm agreeing with you. We want and we see problems, but when the focus is put on us to solve it, we don't have a concrete answer to solve the problem. So now you got the spotlight, but you don't have a concrete answer. So that's why I say if we find out what and how we can solve it and work backward, then we can.
But I will say, for me, it's sort of both, right? Like, I mean, I don't believe that you have a right to tell anybody what they can do in a private space. So it's not so much a question for me that they shouldn't protest, it's that let's make sure we're doing both. Let's do both. Let's not just, be vocalists. Let's not just talk about what we like to do or what we like to see, or just visualize it. Like, let's take steps. Let's donate to the groups we need to donate to. Let's do what we're supposed to do. And I just think that it kind of belongs to doing both, not necessarily just one or the other.
Well, okay, so as a comic, right, one of the common concepts we've often heard is too soon. Can't tell it's too soon. I mean, let's not go there. But similarly, there's an element of these protests that you hear is to say, well, we shouldn't talk about that, right? It's too soon. So there are some who say when there's a mass shooting to say now's not the time to talk about weapons because there was just this horrible event, right? Now's not the time to talk about what's going on, maybe of why a player is taking the knee. It's being politicized. And if that's being used to defer the conversation, it's maybe reasonable to say, well, when exactly is the right time? Is it when hearts are open and minds are calm? And is that even a feasible thing to aim for? At least as a comic, I can get some sense of it when you can broach a topic and it starts to get a laugh. If some of these are more hot button items and you approach it and the first response is for everybody to figuratively get their dukes up, you go, okay, maybe still too soon. All right, maybe, so I don't know. There were probably a lot of folks, you made the analogy when we were on the air, about somebody being the first one through the wall gets a bloody nose, right? Well, there were probably several folks who banged up against that wall, making it weaker, and got bloody noses too before the first person got through, right? And I don't know how visible that always is before you see, because there were some folks wearing T-shirts at basketball games, right? I think one of the WNBA teams, they kneeled, maybe a year or so ago.
Yeah, the NBA, I think, is the only organization that actually has the rule that you have to stand.
Right.
And so it'll be
But they
interesting
were
to see what
wearing
happens.
shirts before saying, I can't breathe.
Right.
So they were protesting in their own way when they were out, before the game doing the warm-ups.
All right, so we get ready to wrap things up. Last thing, sports and politics, right? On one side, you got people from sports saying the president should stay in his lane, and you've got other people saying, well, maybe these athletes should stay in their lane. And we watch football because we like football. We don't want all this stuff. If we want Meet the Press, we'll watch Meet the Press. If we want cable news, we'll watch cable news. In politics, sports, we just want our sports. Should everybody stay in their lanes, or is this actually at the end of the day healthy for us?
You want to go first?
I
think
Ladies first.
Okay, she deferred.
Okay, well, here's what I will say. I don't believe that the only person who needs to stay in their lane is somebody who's on the public dole, somebody who's being paid with taxpayer dollars. That person's obligated to stay in their lane. Everyone else can roll the dice with their employment. They have the right to do that. They have the right to sign up for any other means to make a living. So it's not fair enough to say that I would really enjoy my football without any politics, and therefore if people are being shot in the back while they're running away, or if mothers are having special conversations with their sons because they look a certain way and they're worried about it, that's just a huge inconvenience to my Sunday night. I think we're a little bit better than that. I think we have to remember what Jefferson said, which is that dissent was the highest form of patriotism. So there's nothing un-American about protesting, and there's nothing more American than voicing how you feel.
I should have gone first.
You should have gone first because it's going to be anticlimactic to that.
I know. Come on. I mean,
You're
that's.
done.
I was simply going to make reference to the old Reese's Pieces commercial,
Okay.
which was you got my chocolate and my peanut butter. You got peanut butter and my chocolate, right? And it was about this idea. And she went with.
And thus was the Reese's peanut butter cup. There it was. So is this healthy, or is this detrimental to the sport, detrimental to politics, detrimental to all of us?
I think it's healthy. I think it's healthy from the standpoint, again, my purpose and what I'm doing. I'm trying to educate, my platform that I try to educate are the middle school kids. Because I feel like there are some, until you change people's hearts, again, I definitely believe that. So there is a generation that is coming. Now, we may not see the results of what is happening right now in the next 3-5 years, but believe me, change is coming. So the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders right now, they are one day going to be in positions to vote, to run for president, to run for some type of political office, or to be an athlete. And if they're educated properly, okay, this is what you stand for, this is right, this is wrong, then the more that we can educate them, then the better I think the future is going to be. So that's my purpose. That's where I reach back and try to educate the youth. The adults, there are some adults that, hey, you may have to say, hey, you only got 10 more years to live. So after a while, you ain't going to be no problem. So, but right now, the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, they are the future. So correct it with them. There are going to be some sacrifices, casualties of war. But these kids coming up, they are the future. So I think it's healthy.
Any final words, Letitia? For the people at home. Well, thanks so much for joining us for Late Feed Extra here. And of course, the show's on every night at 11 o'clock. Later on Sundays because it's after football. But 11 o'clock on 11 Alive. And if you're around the country, you can find it on 11alive.com. Big thanks to Tyrone Poole, Simone Cherie Price, Jamie Bendel. See, I memorized these names. And these weren't easy names tonight,
really
by the
good.
way.
Yeah.
And so glad you guys stayed for the extra as well. Really appreciate it. And Natisha, we're done. We can punch out, right?
Yeah.
So, and by the way, there are
Does that
no
mean we're
rules.
starting to protest?
There's no rules about me wearing a tie. I can do whatever I want here. See ya.